I grew up on Kentucky Street in Louisville at the corner where there was an Ursuline sister group already. They served at St. Therese Parish and taught me in school and taught all my family as well. My parents were parishioners at St. Therese, which is still there, believe it or not, but now joined together with two others, and I think they sort of have Mass once in a while, but I'm not sure what's always going on there now. So, but there are people who continue to go there to Mass, and it continues to happen. I was in the school, as were, now my oldest brother, see, those are things I don't know well because I was a child of late life. My mother didn't have me until she was 46 years old, and she had had my other brothers and sisters much earlier. So I was a child of late life, and she was 46, my father was 52, and unexpected as I was. However, my sister, who was 15 years old when I was born, and my oldest brother, who was 20 at the time I was born, they were almost like a set of parents, somewhat. But my oldest brother was he was fighting in the war, in World War II. I was born in 1946. And he ended up being in Japan exactly when I was going to be born. And then, and my father wrote the only letter he ever wrote to him. My mother and father both came from Germany. They were originally. And he wrote his only letter to my brother telling him that he was going to have a baby sister. And that's when I got named by my oldest brother. Yeah, and we had a lot of Pauls in our family. My mother had a brother named Paul, and she had a sister who was named Paula. And so they put it all together, and my brother Joseph is the one who said, well, let's call her Paula. So that's the name I got. As I said, my mother had a brother named Paul who was the only other member of her family from Germany who came to live in the United States. And he came first and lived with my parents. And but the reason my parents even ended up in Louisville was because my mother had an uncle who had a farm out in what, now is part of the big park area out there. But they, when my mother was going to come, my father was working down in Schulenburg, Texas. That's where he had gotten somebody to sponsor him. That was back in the 20s when you had to have a sponsor who you worked for. And my father was a cabinet maker, trained cabinet maker, an artisan is what I would call him. But, and so he had this job down in Texas, and he was saving money to bring my mother to the United States. Bought one boat ticket, and that didn't get used because her mother wouldn't let her leave. And then he started saving for a second one. But the only reason that my grandmother, my mother's mother, the only way she would let her come to the United States is if she came here to the Louisville area where her brother, who was the uncle, was already working and had a farm. And that's the only reason she would agree for my mother to come. Otherwise she wouldn't let her leave. And so my father then traveled up to Louisville, and then they got married at what was then Holy Trinity Parish, which is the old Holy Trinity, real old. And that's where they settled, and that's where they got married, and then ended up being married and living there on Kentucky Street forever. They never settled out on the farm. My mother worked on that farm for my uncle, but they never lived out there. Instead, they ended up living here in the Louisville area, and ended up, their first settlement was down around where the current, there's still a train area down in kind of in the center of town. And they had a little apartment there first, but didn't live there very long. Bought a house on Kentucky Street near St. Therese, and settled in that house, a shotgun house. And that's where we all were raised, in that shotgun house. And I ended up going to school there. You know, when I was born, my oldest brother by that time, you know, like I said, he was 20 years old when I was born. And we never moved from there. And my parents did everything from there. They ended up having my sister's because it was so close to church, and all kinds of things on Barrett Avenue and what's even still there now. They settled there. I can remember once them thinking about moving, and I went with them to see a house, and I thought it was the wealthiest house I'd ever seen, because it had 2 front windows, and when you went up the steps and you walked in the house, there were 2 rooms. It wasn't a shotgun. You know what those are. That's when I thought, oh my gosh, this is how rich people live. But my parents stayed there and I grew up there, so forever. In Germany, it is a double name, and double names are not uncommon. However, when my father came to the United States, and he was at Ellis Island, and he was to be signed in, they wanted him to drop one of those 2 names. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they said, you have to. He said, I'm not going to do it. So he said, I'm putting a hyphen in there, so you have to keep both those names. So it was his insistence that it remain Kleine Kracht, which there are still Kleine Krachts in Germany today. But anybody who is in the United States that has that name, I'm related to them. I think about that every once in a while. I think how brave they were, both of them, my mother and my father. By the time I came along, everybody was speaking English. You know, my parents as well. They had German here and there, or we had German language sometimes, but we were careful because they had lived here through the war then. And that was really a business of, you know, they ended every connection they had to the German country, and so that they could prove themselves good Americans. I went to St. Therese, had all good Ursulines there, some of whom I still remember, and remember what they actually, one of them, Sister Donata, lives here. She taught me in the 2nd grade, and we laugh about that a lot. But the other members of of the sisters who taught me. Most of them are, well, all of them, except for Donata, really are no longer living. But so that was, and at that time, my mother would take me across the street to see the sisters. They would always give me cookies, be good nuns that they were. I remember Sister Monica, who was a cook, and she was a cook there at St. Therese. And I can remember helping Sister Donata go down to clean church. I did that, so I was really primed for being involved as what nun life was like. They were good women, all good women, and all serving God and doing the good things, and it was a normal neighborhood, and it was of all these shotgun houses and all the things that were part of growing up in any place in Louisville, I think, in many places. I look back on it now and realize at that point I had no sense of the inherent existence of prejudice in our city. You just had no sense of that. Nobody grew up with that understanding. But now I know it, and now I know that there were things. I know that my father was prejudiced. But I also, and I don't know what one does with that except say, I'm sorry it happened and I want to not see it anymore. That's about where you go with it. Mm-hmm. But we were, like I said, I knew that I lived on Kentucky Street and that I could walk up the street, but when I came to the railroad tracks, I stayed on one side of them, didn't cross over. And I know that was issues of prejudice at that point, too. It just existed. But, people were everywhere, and some of those little shops still exist, and still are doing their thing and still serving people. I think they have overcome or have attempted to overcome some of that dark side of all that. But what was. And they followed suit with it all, too. Well, I tell you, that involves my father. And my father was convinced, and I think he learned it from somebody else in the parish. There had been another family in the St. Therese parish who had sent their daughter to Sacred Heart Academy. And it was time for my sister, who I said was 15 years older than me, it was time for her to go to school. And that's when he made the decision. And at that point, parents made the decision of where you went to school. It wasn't, because I was living at St. Therese there, which most of the girls who went to school at St. Therese either went to Mercy or Ursuline Academy, which was all of which were in walking distance. Those were the two big ones, okay? And people going to Sacred Heart were unusual from St. Therese. So, but my sister had gone there. And my father was pleased. I tell jokes about what he said to me about my sister going to Sacred Heart. But anyway, he made the decision that that's where she would go. And we had to ride a bus to get there. We had to go over to Oak Street, ride that bus, and it took us right past the campus of Sacred Heart Academy on that bus. So she had done that, and so when it was time for me to go to high school, I don't even remember thinking of anywhere else. I just remember being told that's where you're going to school. And I do remember him saying to me, he said, "And if you learn to smoke like your sister did at Sacred Heart, you're out of there." Well, I took that as law. I listened. When my father spoke, I listened. And I did what he said to do, So anyway, those are the kind of things I tell now, and I think those are jokes, but they took place, they happened, and they had their effect. The year that I went, there were two other girls, one girl a year ahead of us from a family called the Moore family, who had lived in St. Therese. She went to Sacred Heart. And her sister, who was in my grade, we went, and a cousin of theirs, who was also in our grade, went that same year. So there were three of us, and with one older one. Now, by this time, my sister was graduated and doing all kinds of other things, and in college, I think, at that point. But because she graduated in 1946 from Sacred Heart. But so we rode that city bus. We'd go over to Oak Street and get on that bus and ride down there and get to Sacred Heart Academy. I was in the last class to graduate from the old Sacred Heart Academy building. So I still am from that group. But it makes me laugh when I think about that. We sat on that bus, rode that bus. There were very few of us. There were a couple of girls who were down further who got on the bus ahead of us, but not much. But then when we got to Bardstown Road on that Oak Street line, which is still there today, that's where the girls got on the bus to go to Sacred Heart Academy, because they came in from out in the outskirts. That was an exchange there in that area. And that's exactly what it was for us. I mean, it was a city bus, and we took that bus out to Sacred Heart Academy and got out right there by, you could do it today, the same stop. You're sitting there. And so I was there for 4 years. I was a good student, but I'd been a good student in St. Therese. And I developed areas that I liked. I had started to take piano when I was probably, let me think a minute. We had a piano in our house, and that's where I learned how to start playing the piano. I went over the St. Therese sisters. They taught me piano, and I'd go over there and take a lesson, practice, and come home and practice. My brother, who was the next to me in age, he played the trombone and was very good. And there are whole stories about him playing the trombone. But in the end of it all, I was good at piano, And it was also the time when we started to have organ and we sang masses. And so when I was probably maybe in about because I can remember Sister Antonine, who's still living. She was the one who started me on playing the organ and started me to sing Mass while I played the organ, and we were singing Latin Masses. And I started to play down at St. Boniface, where they needed somebody to come and play the organ because those Franciscan priests would have 5 and 6 masses that were especially for the dead. You know, they would have those per day, and they have to have them said because that's what people paid them to do. And so I would go down there. My father would take me down there. He would drop me off, and I would stay from like, I'm going to say maybe 6 in the morning till about 10 or 11 in the late morning, and I'd have a Mass every hour. And I made enough money to help pay my tuition at Sacred Heart Academy. Tell you just kind of, those are all just things you remember having done. I did that till probably, I was in high school, and I was still doing it to help pay for that my high school tuition, which, of course, my father was glad for, you know, because it was expensive to go to school there. And but you did what you had to do, and you knew what the goal was, and you knew what you were trying to achieve, and you knew where you were going at that point. That was the intention of it. So learned a lot, and led me to the point where I met some of the sisters at Sacred Heart who became very special to me. Pat Lohman was one of them, and I think she was involved with a number of the other girls there, and used to go out and play tennis with them too, out there on the campus, all those kind of crazy things. But they were, it's what led to vocations in those days. And I left Sacred Heart Academy when I graduated. I graduated like in June of, that would have been what, 1964. Yes, I graduated from high school in 64. So 64, I graduated from high school. I entered that fall of 64 into the community. So with Ruth Ann Hounds and Rita Ann Wigington, we're the only 3 remaining still from that class. But that's the 3 of us. We're 3 of, at that point there were 16 women who came together at that time. You know, as I think back on it, or when I think back on it, I know Pat Lohman played a big deal in it. And I know that several others, including Sister Brendan, played an important role. But Pat played a big role for me in making that decision. And we continued to be good friends after I came to the congregation. Unfortunately, and I'm sorry, I look back on it too, realizing that somehow or another, I was part of a time when they started to feel the influence of the older sisters on the younger was not a good thing. And so they kind of were telling us not to get too involved with the sisters who were already in the and Pat and I slowly kind of lost connection, which was very unfortunate. I felt very badly for many years about that. She and I remained friends. And she, of course, went on to Bellarmine and did all the wonderful things, and is the one, and remains and has been the wonderful person that she was during all of that. And I am very grateful to all of that. But I also know we had this kind of strange period of time in there with that. But it also was a time when the church was in the middle of trying to really becoming struck by everything, all the turmoil. Vatican II and post-Vatican II have effect on us. And when we came in, the members of our community were up in arms. Were in turmoil about everything. And it was the days of everybody was, ready to go, make changes and all the things that needed to happen, a lot of which did. And however, when we came to the community, we came to a congregation which had a real mix of who was responsible to ensure that we learn what religious life was about. And that's where we had very, I don't know how to say it. We had very differing opinions, and the differences among us as the 16 of us, we were each our own person, some more willing than others to cooperate and be what somebody wanted, who was in responsible positions, and others of us who weren't. Because we were, at that point, a mix. Only one of us had been to college, and she had been to college at Ursuline, and was very talented and very bright, and was not going to be told by the woman who was responsible for us at the time, who had been a first grade teacher all of her life, began to, from my perspective, began to treat us like first graders. So, it was a real, and if you talk to Rita Ann or you talk to Ruth Ann, you'll get their perspective. I'm sure it came out. There were times in there. And I can remember being times when I'd wonder, are we ever going to make it through this? Or is she going to make it? Or are we going to make it? Who's going to be, that kind of thing. And we had people responsible for us and our training who were exactly in that same position, so we found ourselves really in oddities, and it's one of those things that if we I'm not sure what would happen if we sat down and tried to talk about it today, where we would, who'd comment what. Because people like Martha Jacob, she was part of that, she came to and was part of us at that point. And, it was just like one thing after, I don't know. And it showed, and we knew it. And we knew that sometimes the congregation was making decisions that were probably not the best decisions, but they did them because that was the only thing they could do, So, and those are all, like I said, things that could go on and on and on. Conversations could be had about the oral history of the Ursuline Sisters at a time of when the church didn't have it all together very clearly, and we were trying to get through it, even more so than we do now. That's what I keep thinking. We've been through harder times. We were postulants. We were that for a year, and then we were in the novitiate for 2 years. And that was a whole nother, they were learning it. It was in process, tell you how we used to be, and we were learning how things were changing, because we found ourselves at some points saying, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And I can remember, like situations that occurred that ended up drawing lines. I can remember being so angry sometime about things, and I don't know if Ruth Ann ever talked about the fact of during her time while she was in the novitiate, while we were still, being educated and trained, she was involved in an automobile accident, and one of our sisters was killed in it. And at the time it happened, I was way out in Shively, and she was here on the campus. And I can remember wanting to come and see her because of how drastic that was, what had happened, and being told by the superior in Shively, because I could drive, you're not allowed to use the car for that kind of thing. And I said, I'm using the car for that kind of thing. I'm going out to see her. And I can remember saying that to the superior, who I know was infuriated by all of that. But I also remember getting in the car and driving out to go see her at a time when I felt she needed people around her who were part of the group, part of our group. So, those kinds of interactions that go on, it's just one of those things you found. Well, and we have survived all those years. We've done a lot of other things since then, all of us. And we have been trained well, all of us that remained, which is expected now. We would have expected that. And we were blessed by that too, because we also had women who were in leadership positions to know how important that training was to be really good educators. which was ultimately what we were about, was being good educators. And that involved a lot. You know, it involved a lot on the part of the congregation. Oh, and the people who were involved in that is just a whole history that is, it's a wonderful history. And it has I always want to say that to, and I don't say it enough to Ruth Ann and to Rita Ann, how blessed all of us have been to have been together in many ways, but also separate, being trained to do what we were trained to do, and accomplishing the things that we accomplished. Not on our own, but by God's action. That's really what it comes down to. You know, that there was, you probably heard her name, but I don't know if we had a sister named Lillian Ann, who she worked in the business office a lot. I lived with her at a time when I was living at St. Therese, which is a whole nother period of life. But anyway, she would always say to me, Paula, God takes care of children and fools. And I'd say to her, and Lillian Ann, I know which one I'm not. So I always take those words with me and say, that's what I have lived through. You know, God takes care of children and fools. We started to go to college, and I was in one of the first groups that ended up going to Bellarmine to take classes. We took some at our college here, or on our campus still. That's where I had I started my math program and made the decision to really let music go and stick with math, which I did, and learned and met some really good professors that way, both at Ursuline and at ultimately Bellarmine as well, because we traveled back and forth on that. Once I completed the degree here in math, I ended up, at that time, those were the days when the government died for math teachers. I mean, just like any, if they could find one. And so being able to get money from the government to become a math teacher, there were 1 million of them. I mean, and I met 1 million of them. And that's when I ended up going to Notre Dame to school. I was to get to study. That was what it was about. And I had gotten this government grant that would pay for most of it, minimal, And I lived there in what at that point was considered the only housing they had for nuns, but also it was the year that they were starting to have serious conversations about becoming co-ed at Notre Dame. So I lived in a building that was set up primarily for women religious to be there, but it had lay women in there who were graduate students at the time. So that was also going on. which was a whole time of turmoil for them. And so we did all of that. And to this day, too, I still have had contact with the woman who was responsible for that dormitory when it was religious women in it. And it's amazing that, because I get her name every once in a while, and I think, okay, there she is again. Teresa Sandock, I think is her name. She ended up coming to Bellarmine for a while. I mean, you know, these paths that cross all kinds of ways. But she was responsible for, she was like the head of the building, you know, took care of everything. We always reported to her. She was in charge of the building. And so, and that's where I lived. Now, when my friends came, the people I came to know, some of them were married. So they had housing off campus. There was another good friend. I think she lived in that same building with me, and we have remained good friends for years. She has had to struggle with all that too, you know, and deal with all that going on, and what lives we led. Everybody was in math. Yes, we were all in math education. So we have memories of these people who were our teachers and finishing a master's degree in mathematics and meeting friends there who were also being paid by the government to become math teachers. And we have remained friends forever and ever. I still have connections with them regularly. Unfortunately, we're not getting any younger, and it's getting harder and harder for us to come together. We did do that for years, and I've got pictures up on my wall that someone gave me of our years of coming together as Notre Dame students. We still have contacts with each other. They have families that have grown and have children, and there are grandchildren. And then there are those who have become ill have gotten illnesses and are now still recuperating, and some have died. I mean, it's that's a story itself too, you know, a part of life, part of my life. Which I prize and am grateful for, and I'm grateful for all those people. I am aware that things change, that change continues even there, you know, in all kinds of ways. So, you know, I've had some great opportunities because of that Notre Dame connection. I went down to South Carolina and taught for a little while because of that Notre Dame connection, and stayed there, living with our sisters and teaching in a high school that we helped to staff. And the gentleman who was the principal of that has only recently died, you know, so, but he was a real character, and everybody loved him to death, you know, and met some of our sisters there, you know, who, Donata was one of them. Julianne was another one who was down there at that time. Our existing sisters who were there. And it's just like a whole picture of things. And every once in a while you think of the little pieces, but then you realize, you know what, it was just, those are little pieces of this big picture of what's going on, So I was down there for 2 years and taught math, yes, did. And then came, however, and got some illness issues there from my diabetes at that time because I didn't have a good diabetic doctor down there at the time. And I had a sister-in-law who was a nurse who was vehement about some things, and she got involved and said, if you don't send her home, we're bringing her home, kind of thing to the family. However, it ended up that I I left there, and that's when I came back, I started to work at the Angela Mercy situation. We were in the throes of dealing with what was going on at AM at that time for the congregation, which was a whole nother world. This was actually the joining of it with Bishop David. And so I went there at a time when Sister Louise Marie was still the principal. And Judy was there, and Louise Marie, put together a team to be in charge of the school, and I was part of that team. And it involved some other lay women who are still living and still in our hearts too. I'm terrible on names. I won't always remember them, unfortunately, but that's, kind of what you deal with now. That is when I started to live at St. Jerome's and work at Angela Mercy. Would drive there from St. Jerome's. And at St. Jerome's were a number of our sisters who were working in the parish. And I was the kind of oddity. And Sarah Delaney was also there. And she was an oddity that we taught at Angela Mercy. But then she lived at St. Elizabeth's, but I lived there at St. Jerome's. So, it was all going on like that. We did it. The community let us and provided us with a vehicle that we exchanged back and forth. Oh my gosh, anyway. But it was kind of crazy. It was a crazy thing. I never lived at Angela Mercy. But I always lived at St. Jerome's, which was within driving distance of it. And I learned that part of town because of that. And as I said, at that point, Sister Louise Marie was still living and was responsible and for Angela Mercy as principal. And I think that's when she and Jean Ann and a couple lived in someplace else. They didn't live at Angela Mercy either. They had a different place that ask them, they'll give you it was an apartment complex that they were part of. But anyway, they lived there. Came to work every day, and we all worked together. There was a team of us, 2 lay women, plus nuns who were there. And so that went on until Louise Marie decided that she was finished. So she, and I think Judy may have left at the same time, I'm not sure. I became principal and had other people working on this team with me still. And it worked fairly well, but basically our role at that point, and it was a toughie, was to bring Holy Cross, now Holy Cross, but then Bishop David and Angela Marissi, to bring them together into one school, which was one of the ugliest things I've ever been part of. It was really, really it was a very difficult time for me. I can remember sometime going to meetings, walking away and thinking, they have just plowed me over. Because the men were so angry and the women were trying so hard, knowing that at that point we said, we're here to ensure Catholic education in this part of the city is what Catholic high school education. And it was a fight, just a terrible fight. And I can remember, like I said, going to meetings and thinking, if I survive this, it'll be a miracle. It'll be a miracle. And of course, the other thing that we had just gone through as a congregation was the merger of Ursuline College and Bellarmine and so that had occurred and was still in the throes of not being totally settled in a way we liked. I can remember, one thing I remember about that was that when it was talked about Bellarmine and Ursuline coming together in the early 70s, the Ursuline sisters, were operating with the understanding that there would be new leadership. The leadership that existed in both schools would not be the leadership in the new merged school. And that's what we were operating under. Well, that's not what happened. Our best candidate and most popular woman, and the woman who had been so successful, was rejected. And by the board, when they made a decision on who to select, she was one of our sister, and she had been president of our college and was very successful. I can see her, and I should be able to tell you her name. She had been president of our college very successfully. And when it was decided to pick the new president when that merger occurred, it was decided that instead of getting a new president, a different person, that the president of the college, the male president, was selected, Petrick. Having been through that president thing, made the decision about who was going to be principal of this new school. We were insistent that neither previous principal be the new principal. And so all of that having happened, when we came to talking about merging both Bishop David and Angela Marissi, that's when it got ugly. And people were just nasty. And so I pulled out. I knew I was not going to be there anymore. And it also agreed somebody else would do it. And I'm not sure who they finally picked, but they did pick somebody who had not been the principal of either school. And that's when I started to look at further study and began to look at other schools to go to, and I ended up going to the University of Chicago to do doctoral studies. And which then ultimately led to my teaching over in Delaware and a lot of things that followed from that. But I spent 5 years in Chicago studying, and I met some dear friends there who I still remain connected to. Both of them are Australian, believe it. One of them is an Australian sister, and she is very talented, and they're both getting very old, like me, but we remain connected via our Zoom. That's our best way of saying hello to each other and talking to each other and supporting each other still. So anyway, the two of them and through them, I've never gone to Australia. Unfortunately, I would love to. My brother and sister-in-law did. They hooked up with them and really connected and got down there to see them. My doctoral studies group, those are the people I connect with my doctoral work. Well, I did a case study of basically 2 or 3 principals at the time and how they were working in the schools that they were in and what it was involving when they did that. They were case studies, which was a different kind of research. I followed them around for several months and visited their schools and watched them and observed what they were involved with. 2 of them were urban, and a third was out. One was a Catholic, the other 2 were public, and that's what my dissertation's about. If you're really into that, I wouldn't suggest it, but, I think what I set out to prove was that the role of a principal in situations like that becomes less and less strong involvement and much more of a listening to and responding to the decisions that were being made by the people who were working there and shaping the programs themselves. And it was, I guess that's the best way I could put it. So it's less involvement by the principal is probably the thing that best leads to good things happening for the organization. And being very attuned to what's going on, listening carefully, providing feedback, that type of thing is what I think I found most to be the case, for whatever that's worth. Well, what I ended up, I had completed it, and the couple of men who were responsible for directing my study all of them were very fine, very fine thinkers and careful writers. And they gave me just real great feedback when I finished it. And I did write some articles based on it. the thing that I got from that is I ended up getting a position, a position at the University of Delaware. Which is where I served for about, I'm going to say maybe 6 to 8 years. I learned over that time that I have found out our current president of the United States' wife is a graduate of the University of Delaware. And she studied with one of the women I was working with there at the time. But I served there on staff and, again, taught classes, traveled around the state teaching for the school. I became good friends and still remain friends with several of the women from there who were in various areas of education. And we have remained in touch since that time, which is the kind of amazing thing you do, you know. And I have all these memories, which are now becoming weaker and weaker memories, but because that whole area, I actually lived first in far Pennsylvania, where Sister Martha Starman was. She and I lived together. She had been there working for a long time with the Hispanic community. So when I moved to this Delaware area, it was very close to there. So what I ended up doing was first living with Martha. We lived together, and I would drive down to the Delaware school to go to teach, to work. And I did that for maybe about a year and a half, and realized that that wasn't the smartest way to do everything. So I ended up then, I ended up no longer living with her, but moved down to the Delaware area, got an apartment there, and was more involved directly with the school and with the people who were teaching in the school, and, you know, got connected more and more with them. So it became, and, you know, there were good things going on there. And I was working, and I was teaching and trying to keep up with what it means to be a university professor, you know, and trying to do some research, which I did on my own as I was. So those are all things you learn to do. All of them were involved in education of some form, you know, the whole thing. And I taught various forms, and sometimes I taught in different parts of the state, and you just wandered all around and did all the things the University of Delaware told you to do, you know, kind of thing. So I did that, and I was doing that, and I did that, as I said, for about 5 or 6 years. And meanwhile, I was also still trying to remain involved back here in Louisville with things the Ursulines needed people my age then, which I was young. I was active, and I had just been educated, and all those things that, you know, we were at those points. And it was also a way to be connected with some other Ursuline groups that were around that area, who were not Louisville Ursulines, but Eastern Province Ursulines, you know, Delaware Ursulines. I met people like I met people from there who were teaching there, and had all kinds of, it was like just a whole nother additional world of ways that we were involved. And meanwhile, I was still trying to remain supportive of doing some work back here in Louisville, among which was the beginnings, or the time when they were trying to make sure they had good principal at the academy. And it turned out the woman they had was not doing a good job for them at all. Made some people very unhappy. Maureen Fields was her name. I'll give you her name because that's part of the history of our school system. That's Sacred Heart Academy. And I served on their board of directors. And when all this was going on, and Maureen was becoming less and less somebody they wanted around, then people started to say to me, I think that's a job you should do. So that's when I ended up becoming the principal at Sacred Heart Academy for the years that I was there. Which again, I lose track of, but it was something like, I'm going to say, 1990, 91, somewhere in there. But I was there as principal and remained there for like about 6 years as principal. Saw the beginnings of the transition over to the corporation, the school corporation situation, because there were people who were very against it. Even our own members who were just like, what are we talking about here? But I was part of the group that was willing to work with that, and we started, and one of the first things we did was build that new, now that I called it the new, but it was the Sacred Heart Gym that currently exists there, because that was before that. The gym was in the main building. You would not even remember it, but the gym was in the same building as the cafeteria is now, all those things. So, but we made the decision to build a separate gym. So that was a whole thing we worked on, whole project that was the first big building project for them, I think, was that gym. St. Thomas Center had been there. That was there while I was being trained. I lived in there while I was being raised as a novice and a postulant. I lived in St. Thomas Center, which was a whole other crazy world. You probably have heard of that one already from somebody. And that St. Thomas Center was there. And we stayed there, a group of us, because that was part of the college at that time. It was a college dorm and place for retreat. All kinds of things that went on there. And it was constant change. It was constant change, and there are women living today who remember those same things that I did, and I hung in there and continue to hang in there as I watch more and more of us depart. I tell you, first of all, my first role was when we were working with getting everybody to believe the best thing was to turn this, to ultimately turn all of that property. That was very early conversations about that, of the property being turned over to the corporation. Now, I was not in leadership. That was going on. I was principal over at the school, and I was doing things like watching this gym be built and watching a man who drove. I can remember being in my office and this gentleman having a big, it's like a plow, but it was bigger than a plow, bulldozer, and him driving in the front door and banging into a wall, and my looking over at him saying, "What have you done?" And he said, "I wasn't supposed to do this." And I said, "I can tell you, I know that." And I watched it, I watched this wall that had been destroyed. And I thought, I cannot believe this. But that's what I'd see, those kind of things. Those were the days. And we were making the decision to change the gym into what it is now with all the electronic stuff, before that was just, and the art department decision was made to have it up there. We kept the place to eat, but the upper stairs, there were upper floors. And we built, that got renovated, that whole gym got renovated that was up there. I mean, it was a huge, huge project. And that was all going on. I was principal while that was all happening, so. And then, to some extent, that may be what kind of drove me a little bit crazy after a while, because I did leave, and again, I'm trying to get my numbers straight. I'm going to say around 2001, but I'm not sure. But I was ready to leave then, and I did, and I took about 6 months off to kind of get my head together and myself mentally together again. And during those 6 months is when I had read and learned about Nativity Academy programs. And so that's when I started to really look more seriously at that and turn myself toward doing that. And that's where it is. And at the time, we were the first. That's when Judy and I worked together at Sacred Heart to begin that program. And she and I traveled around up to Cincinnati to visit people who had programs like that, the IB program, which is what came out of that, which is where they are, and all of that was just kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. I say, I don't think Judy and I had the foggiest notion of what it was going to involve or could become, but that's what it's become. Originally, what it was a school, and we had seen it up east. The Jesuits had started it, and there were some along the East Coast, and there was one in St. Louis, where basically it was a program for children in poverty to ensure that they would be able to have school longer than just half a day. They were to be kept in school until 6 at night and taken care of during that whole time because they lived in poverty areas. And we struggled to see how that would work. And that's when what was going on down at St. Boniface that Tim was part of. And Tim had heard about it through his brother in St. Louis. Okay, and Tim had talked to Bill Fichtelman, and they had that conversation. And I fell upon this program at a time when I was really looking to start and be part of something very different. And that's what it appeared. That program, the Nativity program, has taken shape here in Louisville different than other places. But they exist everywhere. But the original goal of them always was education for children in poverty and providing it safely to them for more than the 8 to 4 time. It was always longer than that, and provide an evening meal for them. That was the original. And that's how they still, many of them still provide that, do that. So I was the original executive director and worked with Tim Hogan and Bill Fichtelman. But we got it together enough that we were able to have that program serving children. And at the time we started it, it sat there at St. Boniface, which was in the center of one of the biggest areas of poverty with children in it. And at the time, that's what Tim was trying to serve. He was trying to serve, it was nearly 200 kids lived in Clarksdale, yeah. And he was trying to serve them in some way. And we came to the realization that the Nativity model was what would best help them at that point. At least that's what we decided. For about 2001 to maybe 2011, somewhere like that, And then Tim was found suddenly deceased. He died, diabetic condition, and all those things. And I look at it now and I say, God takes care of them. God will provide. And every once in a while, Amy will call me up and she'll ask me a question involving some people who've been there, and I'd say, yeah. I fill her in with what I know, but it's all, that's not my job, not me anymore. I have ways of I have pieces of information that are invaluable to her, yes, yeah. And she's a very gifted young woman, really dedicated in a way that's way beyond what I think anybody ever imagines. Glad for her. They are serving children, and it's helping those children to get to be well educated and serving other people and developing their gifts is a big piece of it, I think. I was at Nativity, and it was during that time that I was elected to leadership. So I've had a period of time in leadership. I was comfortable with that when I was doing it. It was during the time when Janet Marie was the president. And during that time, we did accomplish a number of things that I think are very important, one being the completion of the whole the whole property becoming separate, the separate incorporation schools. That was one big thing. The other thing that is that we worked on having the sisters move here to Twinbrook, and worked out with them also being over at Clifton. So the decision not to renovate the mother house in a way that makes it livable for us to reside there, because that just would have been impossible. So, those kind of things. And really turning all of that over to the school corporation was a big spiel, a big deal, I think. And I think good things come from that now. The schools have been strong. I think they know their Ursuline roots. I think they have been careful. And they are, I think their board continues to serve us well. I'm not in a position to make a comment or to judge on it. But I found myself feeling, yeah, this is right. These are the right things that are going on. And I look back on the time when Janet Marie was in leadership, and we were supportive of her. Those of us who were with her, I think all of us continue to see it as a time when we made very wise decisions. And it will proceed and continue to be blessed in its own way. That we can step back further from it and be okay. We don't have to worry about it. So it's not a concern to me. I'm able to become the old woman that I am and say I'm still an Ursuline. I'm okay with there being, 40 whatever number of us there are. And that we are demonstrating, I think, still the wisdom that has been the mark of our congregation for the 500 years that it's existed, I think Angela Mercy would look at what we're doing and say, you know what? They're doing okay. They're on the right track. And whatever happens is going to be a good thing. Will there be new members? I don't know. Is that the most important question? Probably not. We have associates, I think are getting stronger and stronger. And I pray for them. I hope they find all that they are being called to be. And I know it's happened in other congregations. I see it in my friend in Australia. She works with a group like that, and I say, it's happening everywhere. We're not the only ones. So I guess you start looking at those things and you say, you know what? I can be okay. I don't need to be trying to give direction. I can be okay with the decisions that are being made and say, all right, here I am. And someday I won't be here. And that's okay too. As I watched Judy go, which was hard. It was a tough one, but I've said this to a couple people. I had forgotten how Judy had so much of the later part of her life how much she was still connected to what was going on in the schools and various things. She really was very. And I was reminded of that as I read her obituary. And I thought to myself, you know, there is in all of that, and there is in all that happened during that, plus all that went on in terms of her celebration. I realized so much of the school was still involved in that, and that's exactly what it should have been, because that was where she was, you know, and that's the part I look at and say, she has been celebrated, and the way it should have been celebrated. The way she should have been celebrated. And when all those girls were singing and all that, I thought, you know what, this reflects it reflects Judy. Good that she did and the good she was and all those things I know. It was a beautiful ceremony. And I think all we can do is be grateful, you know, because she was a special person for us, a special Ursuline. And that Ursuline history goes on and on and on. And it's going to change, but that's okay. After I had been at Sacred Heart as principal for a while, then I became so much more conscious of the need of social justice issues, and they became stronger. And, you know, I was like one of many people who could see our need to be part of that, to take more direct action, or to be responsible for, or to be part of, or to show up for, or to this, or to that. And I needed help to do it because I wasn't physically always able anymore. Sometime earlier on I was, and I did it. And I did it at that point because I knew I had been made aware of what all that meant. And it was a way of responding to that. And the Ursuline sisters were in it with me. You know, it wasn't me by myself by any means, but I was being part of and joining in with. And we did a pretty good job, you know, trying to carry that through and demonstrated it, you know, so, and we've done, you know, we're never going to be, I can say there are things that we aren't going to do, and I'm okay with that. You know, it's, but I also know that we have done a lot in helping others to understand, you know, which I think is very crucial. And I think it's also something I now am aware of that being carried on in the school organization, which that too is a whole world that is more debatable sometimes, you know. I mean, parents get how they get with all that. But I believe that there is strong enough leadership in that school organization and school and all that goes on in those programs with those children, and with the people who are doing it, that they're basically going to be on, I hate to use the word on the right side, but on the side of helping others, of making life better, and not making it something that makes it harder for others. I think that we truly are, I think we're truly committed to that. And we have enough of us still who are committed to that, both as members and as associates and as what all ways that we have, that we're not going to be led astray into a direction that is what? Not a direction toward the goodness of God. So that's not, I mean, it's one of those, you learn, I think we have a good sense of what that means to be, and to be living and to be trying to help others live that goodness of God. You know, and it's, I don't know how do you say that, except it's a call that has been there. I find myself every once in a while thinking, dear old Angel Marissi, back in the 1500s or whatever, it's the same thing she was facing. And it has gone on for the history of the Ursulines forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and it continues on. What do you say to that? You know, well, I guess I haven't thought about that much lately, except I sit here and watch look out my windows and here as I live here, and watch the wind move the trees. I wish I was able to feed the birds more than I am currently doing, but I did. I enjoyed that before. There may come a time when I can do it again. I think the biggest thing I look at, though, is that I become more and more aware that God acts as God will act. And we become more and more not causers of anything, but observers, and people who know God acts that way, know God is taking care of everything, you know? That somehow God is the one that makes that wind blow through the trees, and God is the one that brings those birds up now and then, even though I don't feed them all the time. But they come. They make that decision to come and be in that tree and to sit there and to be with me as I sit in the morning praying, which has a whole lot more to do with nature than it does with, I don't know what. I mean, it's because that's where God is. God is in the nature of our world and surrounds all of us. And that's what matters. You know, that's what matters. I guess it's the kind of thing, age, and realization of all the things you've seen in life and things you still learn that are going on. And that we are, I think, I have to remember that when I'm sitting downstairs here, eating with people of all kinds, and trying to make sure they are, not make sure, but remembering that they are basically people who seek good. And that's the important thing. And it is both my role, but also the role of all of us who have been followers of Angela, of trying to live a life that demonstrates our care and our concern and our love for God's people, for what it means to be a follower of our loving Creator God, and for us, the woman who first shaped us, Angela, but it continues on. Like it or not, whether I do it or not, whether I'm in control or not, or whatever. And I continue to see myself having connections to people who are doing that. And what can you say to that except, thank you. Hey, thank you that continues to happen.